Hello everybody, my name is Wade Thatcher. I'm Director of Finance for the South Shore Regional Center for Education. Thank you for coming today. Kind of expected a bigger crowd, but I guess it's a nice sunny Saturday, so everybody else is doing everything else. So, today we have Philip Churchill with us today. He is an actuary with a firm called Eckler's, and he is a partner with that firm, and he has actually helped other organizations look at this whole issue of whether or not they want to move to the public service superannuation plan. So he has quite a bit of experience in the whole field. Philip is going to do his best to explain as much detail as you need to try to make this decision for yourself, how you feel about it, and unfortunately it's not a simple and easy issue. It's complex, but he's going to do his best to give you all the information in as simple as possible. There is a few things I want to mention before he gets going. Washrooms are just down the hall here. You have to use those. Emergency exits, of course, through the doors here if we gotta go, and there's another one here, and another set down there to the left, and then you turn right down the hall. If you need paper copies, please help yourself. There's more over there. Help yourself to water. We're trying to videotape these sessions so that we can put them on the South Shore website so that people that can't make it to the meetings can actually put it, see it on the website, as well as the document that you see here. We're going to put on the website as well. We have as much as 2 hours available to us should we need that 2 hours. Philip's going to stop through his presentation and take time for any questions that you might have, and there'll be questions at the end as well. So, Philip,
okay,
ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll.
Okay.
Thanks, Wade. So, as Wade mentioned, my name's Philip Churchill, and I work for Eckler in Halifax, a pension consulting firm. I'm engaged by the school, the Center for Education, to help you guys take a look at the opportunity to join the Public Service Superannuation Plan. I don't work for the Public Service Superannuation Plan. I can't speak for them. So if there's some questions about how they do things, I know a little bit about how they work from all the work we've done with other employers who have joined the PSSP. Also, I was the actuary to the PSSP for a number of years, so I got some but I may say that's an answer. That's a question you have to ask the pension services folks, the PSSP administrators. So anyway, as Wade mentioned, if you have some questions, I'm gonna take I'll take a break sort of after certain sections. Some of the sections, just any questions on that? I may say I'm gonna get to that in a minute, and if I get to it and I still haven't answered your question, ask it again. Okay? So sit back. Hopefully we can get through this thing and answer all your questions that you might have. So so a little bit of background to start. So the CUPE staff pension plan is a defined benefit pension plan. The plan sponsor is the South Shore Regional Center for Education. So it's the ultimate responsibility of the center, of the employer, to meet the pension obligations. Right? If there's not enough assets in the pension fund, the employer is responsible for making sure that there's enough money to pay all of the promises made to plan members. Okay? The staff, Wade and his crew, provide oversight of the plan that's supported by consultants who prepare actuarial valuations, third-party plan administrators. They would have investment firms help invest plan assets and manage the pension plan. There's also the Pension Advisory Committee, which provides some oversight and meets regularly to discuss the pension plan and any issues that might be happening through the pension. So the pension plan, the pension plan is subject to the Nova Scotia Pension Benefits Act. So there's a regulatory framework under which the pension plan operates. The Pension Benefits Act would require things like determining how contributions are made, how deficits are funded, how benefit improvements can be made under the pension plan, and that sort of thing. So there's a regulatory framework under which the pension plan operates, and that is the Nova Scotia Pension Benefits Act. The plan is exempt from funding any solvency deficits. What solvency means in this context is the plan is wound up. So if the plan were wound up, all active members were provided with the value of their benefit. Pensions are annuities are purchased for pensioners. Is there enough money? And if there was not enough money in the pension fund in order to provide for all those benefits, the plan would be said is in a solvency deficit. And under the Pension Benefits Act, most pension plans are required to fund that solvency deficit over a short period of time. Plans like most plans in the broader public sector in Nova Scotia are exempt from making those special payments towards solvency payments, and the Shore School Board, the Centre for Education CUPE plan is exempt from making those contributions as well. The funding regulations are in a state of flux right now. The PBA, it might be changing in the next little while. Not sure how it might impact the CUPE pension plan, but there is a move afoot amongst lots of pension regulators across the country to strengthen funding requirements, which may require increased funding under a pension plan like the Shore plan. So contributions are for current service costs, so the cost of benefits that are accruing to plan members every year are shared between the plan member and the employer. So right now, the employer is responsible for paying 55% of those contributions, and the employees pay 45% of those current service contributions. Any payments required to pay for a deficit are the responsibility of the employer right now. So if there's a deficit in the plan, the employer is responsible for making those contributions. So the regulations under the PBA and how benefits can be changed under those regulations means there's limited flexibility in the regulatory world today for any benefit improvements like indexing, any kind of inflation protection, right? So the Pension Benefits Act says for plans with a solvency deficit, you cannot improve benefits unless you fully fund the cost of that improvement. So if in the past, when there was a surplus, the employer sometime would do base year improvements, right? Improve the benefits for years prior to. Right now, the base year is 2002. So for years prior to 2002, the benefit formula would use the 2002 earnings for those years rather than the prior years. We'll get into this a little bit later. But what the Pension Benefits Act says is for a plan that has a solvency exemption, like the CUPE plan does, you cannot improve benefits without providing funding for those benefits. So they cannot, even if the employer wanted to, they couldn't provide any indexing to retirees, improve the base year without making a substantial contribution to the pension plan. So, and the other thing, lots of employers these days are hesitant to improve benefits because once you improve benefits, they're permanent. And once bitten, twice shy. You know, what's happened, you know, think about how volatile investment returns and funding have been for pension plans. Once you, if a plan is a surplus, and you improve the benefits, and then it turns into a deficit 5 years later, now the employer is on the hook to fund that benefit that they provided 5 years ago, right? And that, in a lot of cases, employers, unless there's a very good, high probability that they will never get into a deficit again, it's going to be difficult in a lot of cases for employers to improve benefits because they've seen what's happened in the past when they've improved benefits and then there's a deficit and all of a sudden now you have to fund even more because of that benefit improvement that you provided. So what are the key challenges that under the plan members are facing under the CUPE pension plan today? Well, one of them is maintaining the purchasing power of pension benefits. You know, right now under the CUPE plan, when you retire, if you're retired with a $10,000 a year pension, your pension is going to be $10,000 for your lifetime, right? There's really no expectation, given the current financial state of the world and the pension plan, that indexing will ever be provided to those benefits. Okay. The same with active members. The base year is now 2002. It's unless there's a change to the pension legislation and a significant improvement in the funded position of the plan, it's very unlikely that the plan will be in the position to be able to provide any base year improvements anytime soon. And also maintaining reasonable contribution rates, right? You don't want the contributions to be, you want them to be reasonable, you want them to be predictable. One of the things in your current plan that happens is every time a valuation happens, the employee-employer contribution split gets redetermined. Right? I think contributions went up just last year because of the new valuation that was done at January 1, 2016. Has it ever gone down? I don't think so, right? So one of the things that we're trying, I think most people would like is stability in contributions and knowing what they're going to be and not having them change very often. From the employer's perspective, one of their big challenges is just running a pension plan, right? They are, this isn't their reason to be, is to run a pension plan, right? This is the South Shore Regional Center for Education. Their job is to run the education system in the South Shore. They happen to have to run a pension plan for their employees, happy to do it, but it's not their focus, right? So one of the things that, there's lots of administration, lots of governance responsibilities. They're not getting easier to run pension plans. It's getting way more complicated. When they change rules, they typically aren't changing the rules to make things simpler. They're making it way more complicated. And that's becoming much more difficult for most small employers today to run a pension plan, given the significant regulatory hurdles and regulatory rules that they have to follow. It's just risky running a pension plan, right? The pension plan is big relative to the size of the employer. So there's risk from contributions, there's risk from just how big this pension plan could get relative to the size of the organization. It's just a risky operation for an employer whose main reason to be is not financial, running pension plans. So we've done a little bit of analysis, a comparison of the CUPE plan to the PSSP. So I'm going to run through some of those comparisons and some things that we see when we compare the two pension plans together. So pension plans need to do actuarial valuations, sort of look at their assets and liabilities every so often. The last date of valuations of these two pension plans, the CUPE stat plan, December 31st, 2016. The PSSP, December 31st, 2017 was the last time they did a valuation. Assets, the CUPE staff pension plan has assets of $17 million as at the end of 2016. The PSSP had assets of $6.2 billion with a B, $billion. So what's that? 30 times bigger, right? 40 times bigger. The investment set, what a plan that has $6.2 billion in assets can invest in, and is way different than what a plan with $17 million of assets can invest in. They can invest in lots of specialty products, specialty investments that provide regular returns, infrastructure, real estate, things that a pension plan at $17 million can invest in. Really, quite frankly, you guys can invest in public markets, right? Invest in stocks and bonds, and that's pretty much it. Both plans are fully funded on a going concern basis. And what that means is based on the plans earning a reasonable rate of return in the future, everything carrying on as a ongoing employer, there's enough money in the pension fund to pay for the promised benefits. So right now there's no risk, there's very little risk that your pension promises will not be met as long as the plan continues as a going concern. One of the key things we look at when we're looking at pension plans and comparing is how much, if things do go bad, what's the ability for the employer or the plan members or the plan to bring things back into balance, right? And one of the ways to do that is through contributions. right? So we look at the payroll base. So if we look at the payroll base of these two pension plans, the staff pension, there's about $4.6 million of pensionable earnings every year. Okay? The PSSP has pensionable earnings payroll base of about $1.1 billion. So if contributions have to go up by 1%, 1% of $1.1 billion is way bigger, right? So in order for the plan to return to a fully funded state from a deficit, it probably would take a lower contribution increase under the PSSP, given the size of its plan, versus what it would be from the school board, from the CUPE plan. Just spread, the more people you can spread sort of any bad news over, the less impact it has on any individual, right? So one of the things that we look for is a large payroll base in order to mitigate the risk when if things have to change and contributions might have to go up. As I mentioned before, we do a solvency test just to make sure how the plan is, what would the position of the plan be if the plan were wound up on the valuation date. The CUPE plan is underfunded on a solvency basis, so there's not enough money in the pot today if the plan were to wind up and we had to buy annuities for pensioners and pay out all the active members. It's fully funded as long as the plan is ongoing, but it's not fully funded on a solvency deficit basis. But under the PBA, you're exempt from funding the deficit on that solvency basis. The PSSP doesn't even do this test, right? It's, the provincial government's going to be around. It's not going to wind up. This plan is going to continue on for the foreseeable future. So they're not even required to do the test. So if we look at the funded ratio on these two bases, on this going concern basis for the two plans, the CUPE plan has a funded ratio of 109%, which means there's $1.09 in assets for every dollar of promises of pension liabilities. So there's a buffer of about 9% of assets in order to cover off some bad news, which is really good. Under the PSSP, it's also fully funded, and it's about 104% funded at December 31st, 2017. Okay, so there's a buffer to cover off some bad investment returns or some poor experience and the like. Much bigger pension plan, right? The PSSP has over 17,000 active members versus about 140 in the CUPE plan. The PSSP has about 16,000, a little over 16,000 pensioners versus about 150 in the CUPE plan. Again, more plan members, more ability to spread any sort of risk. The larger swath you can spread risk over, the less impact on any individual that risk might be. So how does the PSSP, what is the PSSP? Well, the Public Service Superannuation Plan, it's the pension plan for the provincial civil servants, so all provincial government employees, and employees of a number of provincial agencies, boards, commissions. And other employers in the broader public sector have or are considering joining the pension plan. It's governed by a board of trustees. We'll chat about this a little bit later, but it's the board of trustees who has responsibility for the pension plan. Okay, it's not run by the provincial government. This board of trustees has the legal authority to act on behalf of the pension plan, and is not influenced by sort of government directly. It was the Minister of Finance before 2011 was the trustee of the pension plan, but that changed in I think it was 2010 or 2011 from the Minister of Finance to this board of trustees. So, and the day-to-day of the administration of the pension plan is performed by the Nova Scotia Pension Services Corporation. So there's a professional organization whose only job it is to run 4 pension plans. They run the PSSP, the Teachers Pension Plan, Cisco pensions for former Cisco employees, and the MLA's pension plan. That's all they do, right? They invest the money, they collect contributions, they pay pensions, they do administration for the pension plans. Their single-minded focus is on pension administration, pension investing. They don't have anything else to kind of defer them from doing that work. So one of the things that I think, one of the benefits of that is that they are, it's a low cost, very efficient organization. That's the only job it is to run those pension plans. So it also, part of their mandate, the Nova Scotia Public Service Superannuation Plan, sort of the act and the rules that run that pension plan, is the trustees can't just willy-nilly decide to do A, B, or C. The act and their regulations tell them in certain circumstances what they need to do. There's a well-defined funding and contribution policy such that, if A happens, this is how you're going to react. If B, this is how you will deal with that. And we'll get into that in a couple of slides as well. So they have the ability in their governing legislation to provide indexing, so enhance benefits for pensioners. They can adjust contributions in certain circumstances and adjust benefits either up or down, depending upon the circumstances of the pension plan. When the plan is in a deficit, they are obligated to do some things. So the current contribution rates can pay for a certain level of deficit. The contributions are set such that there's a buffer, such that the first sign of poor performance doesn't necessarily automatically translate into a contribution change or a benefit change. They've built in enough of a buffer that the plan in its current state can handle a little bit of adverse experience. Okay? If the experience is worse than that, then they have the ability to adjust contributions or benefits in order to return the plan to fully funded status. And it's not just that they have the ability, they have the obligation to do it. Okay? One of the things you find in a lot of public sector pension plans where they don't have a funding policy that's well defined is kick the can down the road. Right? Let's not do anything today. Let's cross our fingers and hope that things return and hope that things get better. And by the time they realize things aren't getting better, the amount of change that they need to make in order to bring things back is just a lot. And so one of the things that are in the legislation is early warning signs, early identification of potential issues, and early let's fix it before it gets too bad. Okay. Also in the legislation, in their funding and benefits policy, trustees cannot reduce accrued pensions. So if things are bad, if there's a need to adjust benefits downward, they can adjust eligibility rules around potentially like early retirement or maybe spousal benefits, but they cannot change the dollar amount of pension. Okay, so if a pensioner is receiving a $1,000 pension, the trustees are not allowed to reduce the dollar amount of that pension. If an active member has accrued a $10,000 pension, the trustees cannot do anything that would reduce the $10,000 pension that's already been accrued. Okay, they can do some other things in order to fiddle with some of the ancillary benefits, but they cannot change the pension. So the pension is guaranteed from that perspective. So the purpose of all this is we want a sustainable pension plan. Okay. We want to share their goals are to risk share, so risks are shared between employers and employees. They want the flexibility, so they can adjust benefits upwards or downwards when things are good and things are not so good. And the ultimate goal is a long-term sustainable pension plan. Okay. One of the things I can recall back when they did make these changes and they transitioned from the Minister of Finance to this Board of Trustees was, I want to make sure, the minister said at the time, I want to make sure that they don't have to come back and ask for more money or make any other changes to legislation in order to make this thing sustainable. We want this to be the last. We want these changes we've made to be sustainable in the long term. And I think so far so good. I think they've achieved that. So what are some sort of pros, cons, pluses, minuses, positives of the two plans when you compare the two, whether in terms of plan management? So again, $6.3 billion in assets in the PSSP. That size gives them some economies of scale. Both in terms of investment opportunities, they can invest in things that a smaller pension plan just can't invest in. And plan expenses are lower as a percentage of plan, as a percentage of plan assets, okay? Because more dollars of the contributions that are going into the plan are going to pay benefits, and less are going to run the pension plan, given its size. And I think one of the positives is a dedicated plan administration corporation whose only job it is to run a pension plan. You do give up something when you move to a big plan like the PSSP that's run by a board of trustees. You give up some control, right? The South Shore Regional Center for Education, their job is to pay contributions. The rules of the pension plan are set by somebody else. If contributions need to go up, you can't say, no, I'm not interested, thank you very much. If you're in, if contributions have to go up, you're paying the higher contributions. If there's something, when you run your own pension plan, you can do some things that work for your organization within your own pension plan. Somebody else sets the rules under the PSSP, and you're going into their house and playing in their yard, kind of thing. So one of the goals that the trustees have is, in their 5-year plan, is to increase the active membership of the pension plan. They see one of the risks they have is a plan that stays about the same size, right? They're trying to increase the contributions, again, for exactly the same reason most plans do. The bigger the pension plan, the more people, the more payroll you have to spread the risk of a pension plan over, the less impact those risky periods might be, right? The less that would impact any individual. So one of the things they think about is they're trying to expand the size of the plan in order to become bigger. Again, expenses be lower as a percentage of assets the bigger they get, and just to increase the payroll base under which their plan operates. So the provincial government also is supportive of this goal. And in support of that goal, they've done two things. They've enacted some legislation. Okay? In 2015, there was the University Pension Plan Transfer Act, and that's the act that allowed some university pension plans to join the PSSP. And then in late 2016, there was the Municipal and Other Authorities Pension Plan Transfer Act, and that's the one that the CUPE plan that's the piece of legislation that allows the CUPE pension plan to join the PSSP. So in their last annual report, the PSSP's last annual report, they reported upon the new participating employers who joined the plan in the previous couple of years. So lots of universities: Acadia, University of King's College, St. Anne, Cape Breton, Sherbrooke Restoration Commission, that's Sherbrooke Village, the Bridges in Halifax, South Shore Public Libraries. So I guess full-time employees at South Shore Public Libraries are now members of the PSSP. Cape Breton Regional Municipality joined a year ago. There's another group down this way that I'm working on. Riverview Enhanced Care, LaHaye Manor down in Dayspring are joining the PSSP starting February 1. So lots of others are reviewing. We're doing this kind of work for a number of other pension plans across the province who are considering joining the PSSP. And I know other firms are doing the same as well. So these new employers have added about 1,600 new active members and 700 retirees to the PSSP. So let's, we're going to spend a little bit of time. Any questions before I move on to the next little bit?
It's a little too early to ask this, but I'm wondering if the plan can change to a target and if it plan.
We'll get to that in a, we'll get that, yeah.
I have other questions.
Okay.
The going concern funded ratio,
Yeah,
where it's from ours is 109%,
yeah,
and the PSSP is 104%.
right.
I'm just wondering why the PSSP is lower.
Because, well, I mean, each plan does it on their own set of assumptions, right? So they're not necessarily comparable things, one to one, because of the difference in how the plans are you know, what they use in terms of coming up with their actuarial liabilities. It's just, I mean, why are they different? Well, because they're invested differently, the plan benefits are different, contributions are different, right? So, I mean, it's
And trustees,
yes.
how does one become a trustee?
We'll get to that. There is a slide on that. Okay, so let's just compare the two pension plans for a second and how they are some of the plan design of the two plans. The the CUPE staff pension plan is a year-by-year accrual or a career average type of plan. Every year, 2% of your pensionable earnings gets added to your already accrued pension, right? So if you had accrued a pension of $1,000 this year, that $1,000 gets added to the pension you accrued at the end of last year, and that becomes your new pension at the end of the current year. And it just gets added and gets added on top. And so every year you get added a new unit of pension. Okay. Indexing, or sort of cost of living, keeping up with cost of living changes in a career average pension plan is achieved by using this thing called a base year, right? So the base year, what it is the base year in the CUPE plan is 2002, which means all years of earnings before 2002 are replaced with 2002 earnings. So if in 2002 you earned $22,000 a year, and 1999 you earned $19,000 a year, and coming up with the pension amount, you don't use $19,000, use $22,000 for the year for 1999 earnings. And so you replace, the idea is you replace the older lower earnings with higher earnings in a later year, and that helps keep your pension sort of inflation protected. 2002 is 17 years ago now, right? A plan, in order to keep up with inflation, you want to improve this as often as you can, right? Keep it as a current year. However, as I mentioned before, the current rules under the pension legislation really preclude improvements to the base year unless the employer funds them with cash, right? You actually have to fund the cost of the base year improvement, and then that becomes part of your liability, which now makes the plan even more risky, because now if something were to, there's some bad experience, now you have to fund the deficit on that new improved benefit as well as what was accrued prior to the improvement. So upgrades need to be funded or allocated from surplus, but we can't allocate it from surplus as long as we have a solvency deficit and the plan has a solvency an exemption from funding solvency. So there's really no opportunity at the present time for the employer to provide for any base year improvements. The PSSP, on the other hand, automatically has some inflation protection through its best average earnings design. So your benefit under the PSSP is based on your 5 best years of service, of earnings. Okay? So they doesn't necessarily have to be your final 5, it's your best 5. Okay? So they're going to take the best 5 years of earnings, and every year, as your best 5 hopefully improves, if you drop off an earnings from 5 years ago and add in a new one, okay, hopefully your best average earnings continues to grow, and that means your benefit for all your, not just the new benefits you've earned, but the benefits you've already earned from prior years, all get more valuable as your best average earnings grows. In addition to the pre-retirement inflation protection through the best average earnings process, the trustees have the ability to provide indexing to pensioners based on the terms of their funding policy. Okay? It's conditional on the funded position of the plan. It's not guaranteed, but it has a very high probability of being provided given the way that the funding policy is designed. The PSSP isn't subject to the Nova Scotia Pension Benefits Act. It's got its own legislation. So all of the things like this, you can't improve benefits when there's a solvency deficit. None of that kind of thing applies to the PSSP. So it makes it just more flexible and able to make benefit improvements when proven to do so. So here's a little comparison. Apologize for all the words and numbers on here, but here's a comparison of the retirement benefits from each plan. Okay, we already mentioned the accrual type, the benefit formula, year-by-year accrual for the CUPE staff plan. Base year of 2002. Any benefits earned prior to 2002 are based on your 2002 earnings, whereas the PSSP is a best 5 years average plan. There is a difference in the accrual rate, the percentage that applies to those earnings. Under the CUPE plan, it's 2% of earnings. Okay, so your benefit is equal to 2% of each year's earnings, whereas under the PSSP, it's equal to 1.3% of your best 5. So 1.3% of your best 5 earnings up to the average YMPE, and the YMPE stands for years maximum pensionable earnings, and those are the earnings on which you make CPP contributions. Okay? It's 1.3% of earnings up to that average YMPE, and 2% on earnings in excess of that. And all of that multiplied by your credited service in the pension plan. So that's the lifetime pension amount. So that's the amount you get from the date of retirement for your lifetime. Okay. In addition to that, the PSSP has an additional benefit that's payable from retirement to age 65. Okay. And that additional benefit we call a bridging benefit. The idea is it bridges you to when your CPP or OAS would start. Okay. It bridges you to age 65. And that's equal to 0.7% of your best 5 earnings up to the YMPE. Okay. So if you add that together, what it means is prior to age 65, a pensioner would receive a benefit of 2% of their best 5 earnings. Okay, 1.3 from the lifetime piece, 0.7 from the bridging piece. So prior to 65, the accrual rate is the same in both plans, 2% of earnings. But under the PSSP, the bridging benefit stops at age 65, and the benefit drops down to the 1.3 and 2. So there is a discontinuity in your pension benefit from the PSSP, a higher amount up to age 65, and a lower amount after age 65. The PSSP has a little quirk. They limit credited service to 35 years. Okay, your plan doesn't, but the PSSP limits credited service to 35 years. So once you reach 35 years, which is like a 70% pension, you take 2% times 35, 70%, you stop contributing at that point. But if you're still employed and your best average earnings goes up, it's your new best average earnings that's used in calculating your pension. Okay, so it's your best average earnings up to the date of retirement, even if those were years you weren't contributing because you hit the 35. Indexing, as I mentioned, the CUPE plan, it's very unlikely that there will be in the foreseeable future any indexing to pensions and pay under the CUPE plan. Under the PSSP, it's subject to the plan's funding policy and trustee approval, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but every 5 years they review the funded status of the plan and decide on what the indexing is going to be for the following 5 years. Early retirement. So under the PSSP, every member who has 2 years of service can retire as early as age 60 without a penalty. Okay. Under the CUPE pension plan, if you retire prior to age 65, it's subject to a penalty. Okay. Only at age 65 is the pension payable without any penalty. Under the CUPE plan, the penalty is 6% per year for the first 5 years. First 5 years prior to retirement, and 4% per year in the excess. So if you retired at age 60, the penalty would be 30%. Okay, 5 years at 6%, 30%. If you retired as early as possible, age 55, the penalty would be 50%. Okay, what's that? 5 years at 6% and 5 years at 4% is 50%. Okay, and the reason for the reduction is because the pensions can be payable for a longer period of time. You need to spread sort of pay less over a longer period of time to have the same value as you would have at age 65. Under the PSSP, as I mentioned, everybody can retire at 60. They have 2 years of service in the plan, but you can retire without a penalty even earlier than that if you've got some additional, if you've got a fair chunk of service. So somebody who commenced employment, they changed the plan on April 6, 2010. If you were commenced employment, and that would apply to the South Shore employees as well. If you were commenced employment with South Shore prior to April 6, 2010, you can retire without penalty if your age and service add up to 80 points. Okay, so that's somebody who is like 55 and has 25 years of service. Their age and service add up to 80 points, so that person can retire at age 55 without a penalty. Somebody who was 52 and 28 years of service, same thing. They could retire without a penalty at age 52. Under the PSSP, those people who started April 6, 2010 or before can retire as early as age 50. But if they don't have the 80 points, it would be subject to a penalty. For those who commenced employment after April 6, 2010, the 80 became 85. So now it's 85 points. Okay? So somebody who is 57 and has 28 years of service can retire without a penalty. And if you retire prior to the date.
How does that work though? If commencement employment on or after April 6, 2010, that means you already got 9 years.
Well, but that could be 10 years from now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to do anybody right now.
Oh, no, but I mean, that's when they can retire when they get there, right? The pension and bridge, so you can retire with a reduced pension, so the penalty before these dates, and the penalty is 6% a year. For every year you go before your earliest unreduced date. So the big win here for CUPE members is 60 versus 65. So a CUPE member could not retire if they wanted to retire at age 60 under the CUPE plan. That'd be subject to a 30% penalty. But under the PSSP, that would be unreduced, would be not subject to any penalty. Contributions. So CUPE staff pension plan members now contribute 6.71% of pay. PSSP is a little bit higher. It's 8.4% of pay up to that YMPE, $57,000 a share, and 10.9% on the excess. One of the things to think about under the every time we do you guys do an evaluation, your contribution rate changes, right? Because that 55-45 split, has it ever gone down?
It's like taxes.
Yeah, right? So there's one of the, and it's precisely, there's no buffer, there's no margin in that contribution rate, right? It is precisely the precise amount that's been recommended by the actuary based on the last fund valuation of the pension plan. The PSSP one has a little bit of a buffer in that if there's some changes to the demographic makeup of the plan or some experience or changes to assumptions that are required in the valuation, I would expect that 8.4 and 10.9 won't have to change so often, right, if at all. Your 6.71 seems to change every time you do evaluation. So, if you're looking for, one of the things we think about is long-term sustainability, long-term stability, being able to budget, right? If you know what you got to pay, better than not. Thing. Employers under the PSSP, it's a 1-to-1. The employer matches employee contributions. Okay? For every dollar that the employees put in, the employer puts in $1. Under the CUPE plan, the employers contribute 122.3% of employee contributions. Okay? That's the 55-45 split. And the employer is also obligated to pay any special payments if there is a deficit. So from a benefit perspective, what are some of the sort of positives of the two plans? Under the PSSP, that best average earnings provides automatic inflation protection. As your earnings go up, your best average earnings go up, your pension goes up. Okay. That rule of 80-85 and age 60 retirement date provides an earlier retirement than you can get under the CUPE plan. And indexing of pensions in pay is a high priority use of surplus under the PSSP.
So as I would understand at a previous meeting I had been to at the road, that the indexing wouldn't be as great for the retirees as it would be for the people that are working. Yeah.
No. So if you're a PSSP retiree, you're getting the same inflation and protection and indexing benefit as any other PSSP retiree. Okay. You're a member of the PSSP, and the indexing is what it is. Okay. The social plan. So the CUPE plan, there is the 2% accrual on benefits below that YMPE, below the 55,000. 2% is greater than 1.3. Okay, so there is that is something that the social plan has in excess of what the PSSP does. Employer guarantee. So the employer is responsible for the deficit repayment. Under the PSSP, there's a sharing of all contributions.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I missed this or what. What's the rule of 80-85?
That's that early retirement thing that I mentioned about age and service adding up to 80 or 85.
Thanks.
Yeah. So on the contribution side, so the total contributions under the PSSP are in excess of that service cost number. So the contributions that are going in are greater than what's required to fund the next year's benefits. Okay? And those extra, so it's about 12.8% of payroll is the service cost, and the contributions are 17.6% of payroll. So that 4.8% excess is able to absorb some demographic changes, so that if there's a change in the population of the plan that might cause the service cost to go up, that can absorb it without having to change the contribution rate. Under your plan right now, any changes to the population that causes a change in the cost of benefits gets immediately reflected in employer and employee contributions the next time you do evaluation. It's also available to provide some deficit recovery. So if there's a small deficit, those extra contributions that are going in will be able to pay for that deficit without having to increase contributions further. Okay. Any change in funding, for whatever reason, is 50-50 share under the PSSP. Under the social plan, the contributions are precisely equal to the minimum required to fund the service cost of the plan. Okay? They're exactly equal to the minimum required to fund, which is what's required under the pension benefits legislation. But that means that if there's any blips in the population, demographics change, if there's required change to assumptions, anything like that, that immediately gets recognized the next time evaluation is done in member and employer contributions. The cost of benefits allocated 45% to employees, 55% to employers. So there's a little bit, where you, every time a new valuation, you'll get a notice saying, geez, there's a new service cost, your contribution rates are going to change. That necessarily doesn't happen under the PSSP because of this buffer they have in the contribution rates. So if there's a deficit in the PSSP, as I mentioned before, contributions are shared 50-50 with employees. So if there have to be deficit recovery contribution increases, they are shared 50-50 with employees in accordance with the funding policy. As I mentioned in the previous slide, current contributions are in excess of the cost of benefits. So just because there's a deficit doesn't mean contributions have to go up. There's enough room to cover off a reasonable level of deficit without having to increase contributions. If the deficit gets bigger, the trustees have the authority to adjust some benefits. Again, funding policy will define what those benefits that they're allowed to adjust are. And it's not subject to the PBA sort of minimum funding requirements under the Pension Benefits Act. Under the SoSure plan, deficits are funded 100% by the employer. So any deficit that's in the plan, the employer has to find the money to fund that deficit. The PBA will not allow you to reduce accrued benefits, that the vested benefits that you've accrued to the date of the change. Okay. Under the PSSP, as I mentioned before, the employer cannot change the dollar amount of pension that you've accrued, but they can adjust other benefits, like that 80 or 85 point rule. That potentially could be adjusted if there was a deficit. They could adjust things like spousal benefits, that are payable after the death of a plan member. Those are the types of things that they could adjust in terms of addressing a deficit and trying to bring the plan back to 100% funded. Questions before I move on? Yeah.
I don't know, maybe this is a question for Mr. Patrick or something. CUPE's been trying to enter the SSRCE pension plan for some time. So I was wondering if the reason we're now being asked to enter this plan is because we have potential for some of the retirees, and therefore they will be underfunded.
No. Nothing to do with the number of retirees you have. The real reason, from my perspective, the most important reason would be that if you look at the NSSBA pension plan, in my opinion, it's almost in the same situation as what we are here. I'm so sure it's, again, compared to the PSSP, a small pension plan relative to the PSSP. And it has different components in it that, in my opinion, are not as good as the PSSP. Specifically, Phil was talking about sharing risk. In our plan here, under this plan, everything's left to the employer, no matter what. In the PSSP, it's a risk shared approach that's determined and governed by the trustees of that plan. And from our perspective as an employer, that's far better than just going to what's essentially, in essence, is a bigger version of what we are right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would say is that one of the wins you get from going to the PSSP is that it's not subject to the Nova Scotia Pension Benefits Act, right? And that provides some, it allows the trustees to do some things that they may not otherwise be allowed to do. The NSSBA plan is, right? So you don't, there's not, that's, again, it's a way of saying it's kind of the same. It's another version of what you already have, right? Yeah.
Also, statement here, benefits can be adjusted by the trustee and subject to funding policy.
Yeah.
We, of course, don't know what funding policy.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a second.
But I was just wondering, can trustees adjust benefits?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Yeah, yeah.
So also, if, say, a person is getting their pension within, say, 5 years, and all of a sudden something happens here, are they going to reduce the retiree's pension?
They're not allowed to adjust the amount from an accrued pension. They can only adjust some of the ancillary things around the dollar amount of pension. If you're receiving $1,000 a month of pension, you're going to receive $1,000 a month of pension. They can't adjust that. That's not within their mandate.
So if you have that slide on it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Just how the PSSP is run, some of the governance aspects of the PSSP. As I mentioned, it's not subject to the Pension Benefits Act. It's got its own piece of legislation called the Nova Scotia Public Service Superannuation Act. More than welcome. You can go on the No Government website on the legislation and read the 100 and odd sections of that piece of legislation. But it defines a lot of things like the funding policy, what the trustees can do, the makeup of the trustees, you know, how often they meet, just running the plan. It's the document that determines how the plan is administered and run. It's not subject to the PBA minimum standards, not subject to the statutory limitations in the PBA on benefit changes. So they can do things under the PSSP that a plan that was registered under the Pension Benefits Act could not do. So there are 13 trustees of the PSSP, and their job, the PSSP Trustee Inc. is the trustee of the plan. And it has 13 directors. The PSSP Trustee Inc., its role is to oversee the administration and investment management of the pension plan. Okay. There are 13 directors of PSSP TI. 6 are appointed by government as employer. Okay, so they are appointed by government. 3 are appointed by the NSGEU. 1 is appointed by the CUPE, the Highway Workers Local. 1 is appointed by the Retiree Association, so the Nova Scotia Government Employees Retiree Association. 1 is appointed by the non-bargaining employees, and there's an independent chair. So they're the trustees of the PSSP TI, and their obligation is to act in the best interest of the plan beneficiaries. Right? They don't, while they are appointed by those groups, they don't represent those groups. Right? Once they are there, their job is to run the pension plan for the best interests of all of the beneficiaries of the pension plan. Okay? So they're not there to lobby on behalf of the union groups. They are meant to be separate from whoever nominated them or appointed them to that position. And also through that, the trustees have this funding policy that's part of the Act, which provides for prescriptive action. So they are told, this is what, if the plan is in this funded position, here are the things you must or can or are allowed to do. So we're going to go through that a little bit here. So the Act requires a major review of the plan to be done every 5 years. One was done in 2015. The next one will be done in 2020. And the purpose of the review is to determine the cost of living adjustments that will be provided for the 5 years after that. So from the next review, we'll set the indexing rate from 2021 to 2025. The last one back in 2015, set the indexing rate at 0.85% a year. So every Jan 1, pensions go up by 0.85%. And in 2020, they will set the cost of living rate from 2021 to 2025. So they also, depending upon what the funded position of the plan, there may be some other adjustments to either contributions or benefits as well. So if the plan is in a deficit, here's what they are required to do. Okay, if the plan is a funded ratio of 96 to 100%, the trustee can increase contributions by up to 1% for each of the employee and employer to achieve 100% funding over the next 10 years. Okay, I don't think they really need to do that, because if the deficit was somewhere between 96 and 100%, the current contribution rate buffer would be enough to cover off the deficit that would be payable over the next 10 years. So just because they're allowed to do it, it may not be necessary if there's only a tiny deficit because of the buffer that's already in the contribution rate. If the funded ratio is between 90 and 96%, the trustees must increase contributions by the amount necessary to achieve 100% funding over the next 10 years. Now, the Income Tax Act also has a limit on what contributions can be, so if they hit that limit, then they might have to adjust some benefits. Okay. If it's less than 90% funded, they will use contribution increases to fund the first 10% of that deficit to get it up to 90, between 90 and 100, and then adjust benefits and eligibility to get it to go the rest of the way.
You just said that you can't adjust the benefits.
Well, you can't adjust the accrued pension, but there are other benefits that are provided under the plan. Okay? So they cannot change the dollar amount of pension. Okay? But you could change the 60 and 2 provision. Right? They could say, we're now at 62. Right? They could change, there's a 60 or 66 2/3% survivor benefit payable. They could change that to 50%.
You mean on a go forward?
No, they could change it. They could change it retroactively. Yeah. Now, they can't change it for somebody who's going to achieve it the next. There's rules about sort of those who are close to retiring.
Oh yeah.
Right. There's things like, you know, if you're going to retire in the next 2 years, you're grandfathered.
Yeah.
Right. But for somebody who's not going to retire for 10, there's little rules around that, but they can change it for all your service. So yeah, I tried to be clear that it's the amount of the dollar amount of pension that can.
Benefits, your dollars.
Yeah. Let's flip it over. So if there's a surplus, so if the funded ratio is between 100 and 110%, the trustee doesn't have to spend it all. They can hide some. They can keep some of it back as a strategic reserve. And in fact, they're required to keep some of it back as a strategic reserve. And then they can use the remainder to provide for pensioner indexing at a fixed rate for those 5 years, but the rate can't exceed 50% of CPI. Okay? So 50% of their best estimate of what inflation is going to be over the next 5 years is what they can provide in indexing. If it's between 110 and 120%, they have to keep half of it as a reserve, so they can't spend half of it, but they can spend the other half on indexing. This time they can go all the way up to 100% of CPI. And then they can modify contributions, so reduce contributions or enhance benefits with some of the other surplus. If it's greater than 110%, they can do the same sort of thing, provide full indexing. They can actually, I think at that point, they can go back and restore some indexing that may not have been given in the past. And then adjust benefits. In this case, they'd be adjusting benefits up or contributions down in order to use some of that surplus. So one of the things I see in this is, you know, again, if there's a deficit and the deficit is you know, not insignificant, the trustees are obligated to do something. They can't just cross their fingers and hope things get better. Right? They're obligated to make some changes in order to bring the plan back to 100% funded over 10 years. Any questions before I move on to the next little bit? Okay, so how would this kind of happen if the agreement, if there is an agreement to move to the PSSP and it all goes down, how does it happen? So what would happen for active plan members is your service gets transferred over to the PSSP. So if you had 10 years of service in the CUPE plan, you'd have 10 years of service in the public service superannuation plan. Then we would calculate your benefits based on those 10 years of service using the PSSP formulas. Okay. However, the pension earned for every individual plan member under the CUPE plan, as at the date of transfer, will be fully protected under the PSSP. What I mean by that is, if you had a $10,000 a year annual pension under the CUPE plan, the day before the transfer, so on the transfer date, your accrued pension under the CUPE plan was $10,000. You would have a $10,000 pension under the PSSP in respect of that transferred service, regardless of what the formula came up with under the PSSP formula. So we're guaranteeing that the dollar amount of pension that you've earned under the CUPE plan would be fully protected under the PSSP. And I'll get into an example of what that means in a couple of slides. For pensioners and deferred members, a deferred member is somebody who has left employment but still has a benefit under the pension plan. So they've got a deferred pension that's payable sort of at retirement, but they're no longer employed. Okay? So for pensioners and deferred members, the pension amount you receive under the PSSP would be exactly the same as what you're currently receiving under the CUPE plan. Okay? All that would change is who's paying the check. Okay, right now you're getting a check from Desjardins, because I think that's your Desjardins,
Desjardins.
Yeah. So right now it would come from the PSSP. Okay. So if you're receiving $1,000 a month pension right now, your pension will be $1,000 a month on the day the next month after the transfer. It will be payable in the same form as is payable under the CUPE plan. So if you've chosen an optional form of pension, so when you retire, you can choose how you want to receive your pension: joint survivor 66 2/3, joint survivor 100, I think. So those would transfer right over and would be payable in exactly the same form under the PSSP. Okay, so no difference in what your survivor would receive. And no difference in any guarantee period that might be on your pension at the moment. All of those things would transfer directly over to the PSSP and would be continuing to pay. You would be eligible for indexing, the same as every other PSSP pensioner. The one little thing is in the first year of transfer, it would be prorated based on the amount of time that you were in the PSSP. Okay? So if, for example, the CUPE plan were to join the PSSP on October 1st, the first year indexing, so the indexing on Jan 1, 2020 would be 3/12 of the normal indexing because you were only in the PSSP for 3 months. Then the second year, it would be the full PSSP indexing, the same as everybody else. Okay. Since you joined the PSSP, your money's not in the PSSP until October 1, therefore you didn't sort of participate in generating the surplus that's paying for that indexing. So it starts on the day you join the plan, which in my example would be October 1. If it happened to be Jan 1 next year that you joined the PSSP, on the next Jan 1 you would receive full indexing because you were in the PSSP for 12 months. Here's a wordy slide. So for active members, everybody, if we looked at what the pension they've accrued under the PSSP compared to the CUPE plan for benefits that would be payable prior to age 65, they will be the same or higher under the PSSP in pretty much every circumstance. Okay? The reason why is it's a 2% accrual rate under the PSSP for benefits that you get paid prior to age 65. And it's a 2% accrual rate under the CUPE plan for benefits that are payable. The CUPE plan is a career average. The PSSP is best average. Best average is going to be better than your career average. So you're going to receive a better pension prior to age 65 under the PSSP than you would under the CUPE pension plan. So because your earned benefits always increase based on your best average earnings under the PSSP, whereas they're always based on the earnings in the year under the CUPE plan. After age 65, that's not necessarily the case, because remember, for benefits after age 65, the pension from the PSSP is 1.3% of earnings up to that YMPE, up to $57,000, and 2% over. But the CUPE plan, it's 2%. Okay, so the pension after age 65 under the PSSP formula is not as generous as under the CUPE plan. Okay, but remember that there's that guarantee for benefits earned prior to the transfer date that would guarantee that you're going to receive at least what you would have received under the CUPE pension plan. So nobody is going to be going to lose any pension in respect of the benefits earned up to the transfer date on a transition to the PSSP because of that minimum guarantee. And we'll go through an example.
At the time that this would go in, voted in, or whatever, and it did go through, how long do you suspect it would take for the transfer to happen and everything to settle down?
Many months.
How many?
Many months. I don't want to guess. Many months.
Years?
Not years, months. Yeah. Because one of the things is you're not the only one who's going through this process. So the PSSP can only handle a certain number of transfers at a time, and you get in the queue.
So that I understand, there would be a penalty charge from going from one pension to the other.
Right.
Will they be charging us for transferring?
Well,
Will we lose?
Pardon me? No.
Will we lose? No.
Your pension will not change.
Okay. That's what I understood.
Yeah. So here's an example of it's a made-up person, but an example of a member in terms of what they would get from the PSSP compared to what you would get from the CUPE plan in respect of benefits that you earned up to the date of transfer. So here's an example of a member who had a best average earnings at the date of transfer of $36,500, had 24.7 years of South Shore service, and is 50 years old. So that person had already accrued for those 24.7 years of service a pension under the South Shore plan of $12,900. Okay? And that $12,900, based on the provisions of the CUPE plan, would be payable from age 65. If that individual wanted to retire at age 60, right, that pension would be reduced by 30%. Okay? So payable from age 60 would be $9,030 a year. Okay? Now let's go through the math of the PSSP. And you'll see that the pre-65 pension, if we base it on that 1.3% of $36,500 plus the bridging benefit of 0.7 times the 24/7, we would come up with a pension of $18,000. Okay, so that person retiring at age 60 would receive $18,000 from age 60 to 65. And from 65 onward, it would reduce to $11,700. Okay? So that's the PSSP formula. But remember, we're going to fully protect the pension that you have earned under the CUPE pension plan. So what would be payable from age 65 is not the $11,700, but $12,900. So this person would receive a pension of $18,000 from age 60 to 65 and $12,900 after age 65, compared to a pension of $9,030 if they retired at age 60 under the CUPE plan right now. So it's almost twice as big as the CUPE pension from age 60 to 65 and almost 140% higher from age 65 onward. Now, I've chosen age 60 as my example here. If you retired at 61, right, doesn't change the PSSP pension much, if at all, but it would change the reduced South Shore pension, because now it's not reduced by 30%, it's only reduced by 24%. So that's sort of looking at the past service, right? So that's sort of the benefits you've earned up to the date of transfer. And an example of what in the future. So what is the pension that you earn after the date of transfer? Okay, how do we compare the PSSP pension to the CUPE plan pension for benefits you'd earn after the date of transfer? Okay, so I'm going to start here in this example with the graphic that I show. It starts with a member who's earning $30,000 a year today. salary is assumed to grow 2% a year. Under the social plan, I haven't assumed any base year upgrades. Okay, so no benefits that are accruing after, there's no improvement in past benefits. And we're going to compare the total benefit payable prior to age 65 and after age 65 under the PSSP to the pension that's payable from the South Shore plan, and we're assuming that somebody retires at age 60 again, so we've applied that 30% penalty. And here's what you get. Okay, you'll see that the red line, I think yours is black and white, so but the top line there is the PSSP payable from 60 to 65. The green, the middle line is the PSSP payable after 65, and the CUPE, and the bottom, the blue line is the pension payable from the CUPE plan at 60 with that 30% reduction. Okay, again, and the years across the bottom, think of that as like future years of service. Okay, not all your total years of service, but what you're going to earn in the future. So if you think you got 10 more years of work, kind of look at the 10-year column. Again, point out, I've used 60 as my retirement age just because that's the unreduced age at the PSSP. If you stay till 61, the blue line would move up a bit, okay, because the reduction would be 24%, not 30%. Okay. So let's put this together. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my very first person again, that example I used before. So the top part of this is exactly what you saw before, where up to the date of transfer, age 60, sort of that age 60 with minimum guarantee line is exactly what was on this slide a couple of slides ago. So this person, if they retired at age 60, would receive $18,000 a year to age 65, $12,900 thereafter. But let's assume they're going to work, that was at age 54, that was that date of transfer. Let's project it out to 5 years, or 6 years to age 60. And take a look at what would be payable. So under the under the CUPE plan, for those 6 years of future service and retiring at age 60, this person would accrue another $3,100 of pension. Okay. Under the PSSP, they would earn another $4,500 a year of pension payable to age 65 and $2,900 of pension payable after age 65. So again, let's put this all together. So somebody who was in the CUPE plan and retired at age 60 with 30.7 years of service would receive a lifetime pension of $12,100 payable from age 60. And that wouldn't be indexed. There would be no indexing that could be provided to that pension. No indexing under the plan. But the PSSP pension would be $23,100 payable from retirement from age 60 to 65, and $15,800 thereafter. And you'll notice that you can't. So one of the things that's also happening in this is my numbers at the top, that PSSP pension pre-65 and post-65, are all as at the date of transfer, right? They've grown, right? And 6 years later, this person's best average earnings has probably grown by 7 or 8, 9%. Their earnings grew by kind of 2% a year. And so that not only has the $18,000, that $18,000 has actually grown to $18,600 just because of the higher best average earnings 6 years later.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in this question, but here goes. Am I with the understanding that, and I'm not sure how it would work, that you can buy into this pension and the social pension you couldn't buy into?
So the PSSP has provisions for members to buy back uncredited periods of service. Okay. Now, it's not just any time. There's conditions on what those periods of service can be. Okay. Because it needs to be, service with another pension plan, service that you got paid out Like if you were a member of the PSSP before and got paid out your money, you can give it back to them and get that service back. But you can't just buy, you can't just say, I want to buy 5 years of service. Okay, the Income Tax Act and will not, has to be, there's rules around how you buy back service.
Okay, I was unsure how that would work.
Yeah,
I just heard a rumor that you could.
Yep, they have all kinds of rules around, types.
You were a spare, then you can't buy.
I don't think so. No, I think it can't, and like even part-time, I think there's some rules around sort of less than full-time.
Yeah, I don't think
employment.
It would have to be full-time.
Yeah. Again, there's, if you went on the pension services, the PSSP website, I think they even have a booklet about what their eligible periods of service are. Any questions before I move on? We're getting to the end. Hey, so what goes from here? So one of the requirements in the pension in the Pension Transfer Act is there needs to be a vote of plan members. Okay, so plan members need to vote on this process. Okay, all active members, eligible former members, and retired members have the opportunity to vote. Okay, if a majority of those who cast the ballot vote in agreement, then the process can continue. Okay, that doesn't mean that a transfer will occur. It just means that the employer has the authority to continue the process, right? Wade's going to have, there's more information about how that's going to happen, vote timing and just voting process will come out shortly. If the vote is no, so if the majority of plan members vote no, not interested, thank you very much, it's done. The CUPE plan will continue, and there will be no more no more analysis or review of the PSSP. If the vote is yes, some other things are going to happen. There's going to be some more more discussions between the Center for Education and the union in terms of what needs to happen from a collective agreement perspective and that sort of thing in order to make this all happen. We need to have some further discussions with the PSSP trustees and the pension services folks in order to get some updated costs of what it would actually cost to move to the PSSP. We've done some preliminary stuff, but we want lots has happened in the markets in the last 2 months that may have caused this thing to be in a position where maybe it's not a feasible transfer anymore. Then at the end of the day, the employer signs a transfer agreement and will make the final decision as to whether the transfer will occur or not. Okay.
That is, when we need information about it, do we go on the website or do we contact somebody?
If you want information about just sort of the plan design and information about the pension plan in general, I think you can find that on the Public Service Superannuation Plan's website. Do not contact the PSSP, the Pension Services Corporation. They cannot, they can't answer your questions yet, right? So if there's a question that the website or the information on the website doesn't answer, I think Wade's your next best person to answer or find you'll get in touch with me or we can find the best person who can answer that question.
Yeah, so if you have any further questions Philip hasn't been able to elaborate on you, I'm at the board office, Director of Finance, Wade Thatcher. Give me a call or send me an email and I'll do my best to answer it myself, or I'll pass on to Philip and get him to answer it for you. We are expecting that the vote probably won't happen until somewhere between mid and late February at this point in time. And the next communication to all the retired and active members and deferred members will come out to you explaining the whole process and the date and all that, when it's going to happen. We hope between now and then that we'll have a meeting with the CUPE union representation as well about this, because we would like we're hoping the membership is in favor of this, we're hoping the union's in favor of this, and so we're hoping this will go forward, but time will tell. So anything else for Phil?
One question I have is, in our existing setup, is if the retiree passes away either prior to or after they've started getting their pensions, the residual amount of that pension is within 1 month paid out to the spouse of that person or whoever's been designated. Is it my understanding that now that will change and that the spouse will then get a residual, a lower paid part of that pension rather than a lump sum payment?
So yeah, so a spouse, well, post-retirement, I don't think, if you've got a spousal benefit, the spouse just gets a pension. Right. She gets a return. Yeah, she gets a continued pension.
Which is a much.
Yeah, it's probably
preferred.
60 or 62. Yeah. So under the PSSP, it's always a spousal pension. Okay. So if you pass away prior to retirement, the spouse doesn't get a lump sum.
No.
They get a spousal pension for their lifetime.
Yeah.
And if you and when you get if you pass away post-retirement, same thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
So,
Mr. Patrick,
Yep.
I'm quite sure that we have at least one member, CUPE member, who is not in the CUPE pension plan.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more, I don't know.
Right.
Are they exempt from all of this?
That's a good question. I think that's a very rare circumstance. And do you mean this individual is not a member of a pension at all, or a member of another pension plan?
He is a member of a pension, but it is
Not this one.
Pension plan.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think I'd have to talk to Philip more about it, and maybe our HR staff to see what they have to say. But we can certainly look into it. Yeah.
also, when I received my pension with the questions that you had to answer, how they employed and what set of, or how much my pension was going to be, depending on how many years down the road, if I died within 10 years, that my husband would get the same amount as I got. I took less for that reason. So
That continues on. So whatever form of pension that you chose when you retired from the school board, from the CUPE plan, that gets carried on into the
to my
PSS.
husband,
Yeah.
till the end of 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thank you.
you coming today.
Free to